Thank you very much. Would you please be seated? I'm going to ask Sam and Liz to come down and bring us our readings tonight. Sam first, is it, and Liz, as we continue our journey through Ruth. So if you've got your Bibles, you might like to turn to Ruth chapters 2 and 3.
Sorry, can I ask, has anyone got a large print Bible? Because I've lost my glasses. I can't see. Thank you.
Could use one, but that's...
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Fine. I'll look after that for you.
Okay. Oh, I can see better now. Okay, so Ruth chapter 2. Naomi had a relative named Boaz, a rich and influential man who belonged to the family of her husband Elimelech. One day, Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields to gather the corn that the harvest workers leave. I'm sure to find someone who will let me work with him." Naomi answered, "Go ahead, my daughter." So Ruth went out to the fields and walked behind the workers, picking up the corn which they left. So it happened that she was in a field that belonged to Boaz. Sometime later, Boaz himself arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the workers. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the man in charge, "Who is that young woman?" The man answered, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me to let her follow the workers and pick up the corn. She's been working since early morning and has just now stopped to rest for a while under the shelter." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Let me give you some advice. Don't pick up corn anywhere except in this field. Work with the women here. Watch them and see where they are reaping and stay with them. I've ordered my men not to molest you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and drink from the water jars that they have filled." Ruth bowed down with her face touching the ground and said to Boaz, "Why should you be so concerned about me? Why should you be so kind to a foreigner?" Boaz answered, "I've heard about everything that you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband died. I know how you left your father and mother and your own country and how you came to live among the people you had never known before. May the Lord reward you for what you have done. May you have a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, to whom you have come for protection." Ruth answered, "You are very kind to me, sir. You have made me feel better by speaking gently to me, even though I am not the equal of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to Ruth, "Come and have a piece of bread and dip it in the sauce." So she sat with the workers, and Boaz passed some roasted grain to her. She ate until she was satisfied, and she still had some food left over. After she had left to go on picking up corn, Boaz ordered the workers, "Let her pick it up, even where the bundles are lying, and don't say anything to stop her. Besides that, pull out some corn from the bundles and leave it for her to pick up." So Ruth went on gathering corn in the field until evening, and when she had beaten it out, she found she had nearly 10 kilograms. She took the corn back into town and showed her mother-in-law how much she had gathered. She also gave her the food left over from the meal. Naomi asked her, "Where did you gather all of this? Whose field have you been working in? May God bless the man who took an interest in you." So Ruth told Naomi that she had been working in a field belonging to a man named Boaz. "May the Lord bless Boaz," Naomi exclaimed. "The Lord always keeps his promises to the living and the dead." And she went on, "That man is a close relative of ours, one of those responsible for taking care of us." Then Ruth said, "Best of all, he told me to keep picking up corn with his workers until they finished the harvest." Naomi said to Ruth, "Yes, my daughter, it would be better for you to work with the women in Boaz's field. You might be molested if you went to someone else's field." So Ruth worked with them and gathered corn until all the barley and wheat had been harvested. And she continued to live with her mother-in-law.
One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for? It's not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that I am a woman of a noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could recognize, and she said, "Don't be known that a woman came here to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." This is the word of the Lord.
Great, thank you ever so much. Good evening. Good evening. Good, I was wondering if anybody was out there. This thing, a journey from lament to hope, that just really covered the last 2 hours, didn't it? If anybody was watching the football, I sat there and thought, Lord, you really are embodying amongst this community hope on one side, then lament, then hope. And all the words I was coming out with, it's not the end, it's just a bend. I was like, yes, Lord, this is all really helping me. And the faith that I showed not to do lament this evening, I'm not bigging that up at all. I'm just messing with you. But it's great to be with you again this evening. Before we get into session 3, which I will flick on pretty quickly to, courageous and faithful living. I just want to say, in the last session, session 5, I want to create a little bit of space in that session to hear some testimonies of your story and how God has been talking to you this weekend. And so I'm giving you a bit of a heads up. Some people have already shared some stories with me, and I've been blown away by your stories. I actually want to say how much I've learned listening to you over coffee or eating or just walking in the hallway or just sitting down somewhere. I've heard so many really powerful stories and even revelation on what you've been hearing while I've just been sharing with you the small bits about what I've been learning. That is Bible in community. That is us wrestling through discipleship together. So I'm so grateful for you for doing that. But please, 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 last session tomorrow that we do, I'd love to create a small bit of space for you to come and just share testimonies and stories and encouragement. That pre-funeral funeral that Stephen was talking about, where we can leave here feeling really encouraged by what God is doing in us. Okay, so we're going to be looking tonight at Ruth 2 and 3. We're going to sort of, what I often call a McDonald's drive-through. It's not a Miller and Carter 3-course meal where you sit down for hours on end and eat. We are going to get through it reasonably quickly. But the idea isn't that I'm going to tell you everything. That was the point, wasn't it, this morning when I was talking to you. But I want to whet your appetite for you to go deeper into this text. So I'm going to probably pick up 2 or 3 things that have caught my attention. But I'm sure out there's going to be 20 to 30 things while you look at the text that capture your attention. So my hope and prayer is that you will go deeper with it as well. And in good framework style, I'm going to start at the beginning with Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, do you remember what I said in the last session? That sometimes we have to stop. When people wrote this book, they didn't have chapters and verses in mind. We put the chapters and verses in. And but there is a pause there where we've now got to the end and realized, we've got to the bend and realized it's not the end. And we're turning around a corner and we're starting to see a new vista. But I found that as I read this story, there's a little bit of a feeling with the writer of, by the way. By the way, there's somebody that you need to know about, somebody quite important. It really tickles me when I read it, because I think to myself, is God up to something? Is God up to something? Because we've heard the story of these 2 people, these 2 women, wrestling and struggling, and suddenly something is coming on the horizon that could potentially change things. A man by the name of Boaz. I don't know if you ever have this, where you have a long conversation with someone, and then they drop a bomb at the end of the conversation and say, "Oh, I've got to go now." I don't know if you've ever had that before. In my family, it happens quite regularly, where if somebody wants to tell you something you don't really want to hear, they wait and wait and wait, and then they go, oh, by the way, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, see ya, have a great week. And you're like, and you're left hanging. And you think to yourself, no, we need to finish this. See, I'm a bit of a finisher, don't leave me hanging, right? Please don't take it to penalties. Please don't do this to me, okay? There's better ways of burning my calories than that. And there's a sense in here, now Naomi had a relative. There's something about the writer that says, I've thrown all this pain and lament and difficulty at you. Oh, and by the way, it's a sudden shift in tone of narrative, but it's not to be overlooked. It's really, really quite intentional. And we jump into chapter 2. And this is going to be a theme that I'm going to really focus in on here, because we see the boldness and courage of a young woman. The boldness and courage of a young woman called Ruth that takes the story to the next stage. She doesn't just go to Bethlehem, find herself in a difficult place. She is now heading into the fields to pick up the leftover grain as they harvest. We see that in verses 2 and 3. She is heading into a space that is not safe. How do we know that? On 2 occasions, in chapters 2 and 3, Boaz tells her to stay in the same field, because if she goes into another field, she could be, and the words were used in that translation, molested. What time are we living in? Can I hear a bit louder? What time are we in? The time of the Judges. Okay, that's why Ruth 1 verse 1 is really important. It sets the context. Women were not safe in this environment. Actually, Boaz had to tell his workers not to lay a hand on her when he left. Let me just stop there for a moment. What kind of environment? This is the people of God. What environment do you have to be living in for somebody to say, please don't lay a hand on them while I'm away, please? This is showing me the courage of a young woman entering into a place of risk. And she meets Boaz, and he highlights to her, doesn't he, as I've said, the dangers for a vulnerable... Now, this is not a vulnerable Jewish woman. This is a vulnerable Moabite woman. And she's mentioned as such. He suggests that she stays in the field. He tells everybody to behave themselves. But Ruth's courage is beyond doubt. I don't know if you ever pray for courage. I pray for courage regularly. And I'm going to share a few stories just over the next half an hour about how God has taken me on a journey with courage. Nikki and I planted a church a number of years ago into the area that we live now. We'd sort of been co-leading a large church, and I had a morning where I reached a morning in my ministry where I thought, yes, Lord, I really feel like I'm fulfilling what you're asking me to do. And I felt a sense, I'm being really honest with you, I felt a sense of ego creeping in. And that afternoon, I really heard God in my mind's eye say to me, I've seen you with 400, now I want to see you with 4. It was like he didn't care about numbers. He didn't care about size. And the long story short was that he called us to hand on leading in that church and to go and plant. I was terrified. Leaving the safety of a church that you'd plowed yourself into. Now this is our story, not yours. Okay? So you need to understand that. I don't go around telling everybody needs to do this. Only crazy people do this, okay? And so we started to tell, our leaders and walk it through with them, and eventually they sent us to London. Nikki, myself, I think our first meeting in a house was Nikki, myself. Somebody attempted to play the guitar, 2 dogs, the cat, and a couple of spiders, because you count everyone at the beginning. And there was a revival of insects coming to faith. No, I'm just kidding. There is a theological precedent. It does say in the book of Jonah, and many animals at the end, so But we were in that moment where we were weak and felt really vulnerable. And God was teaching us about courage, because actually courage is often what I'm receiving from him to do, not what I'm doing in my own strength. And so we started off doing a couple of outreaches, and there's this quite large estate near where we lived, and we were doing kids clubs there. And I was starting to mentor some of these younger leaders. And we went and did this kids clubs, and then we walked to our car, and we got to our car, and our car was clamped. And I thought, I'm looking around and I'm thinking to myself, there's no sign anywhere to tell me that I shouldn't park here. What is going on? So I'm looking around. All of a sudden, this giant comes out of nowhere with a bulletproof vest on and walks over to me. And you could have put Nikki on my shoulders and we still wouldn't have been looking at him in the eye. He was massive. And the fact that he had a bulletproof vest on made me feel rather nervous. I thought, what kind of people do you hang out with? And he said to me, is your name Mr. Langford? And I said, well, it depends who's asking, but yes. And he said, Northamptonshire County Council are after you. I haven't been to Northampton for about 10 years. I have no... Anyway, we're in this kind of... This moment of what is going on. Well, I've got all these guys I'm mentoring. I mean, on about, if you get ego, the Lord deals with it, okay? He'll deal with it in numbers of ways. If you get too big for your boots, he will sort things out. these guys, like, they're sniggering away, just like I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And what had happened was, when we moved from Chelmsford to London, we had changed every detail with the postal service, okay, other than the DVLA. We'd forgotten to tell so someone, and again, I'm not going to say who it is in the family because it could be me. But somebody in the family drove down the wrong road, and we got a ticket for it. We got done for it. Anyway, I've got done for so many things over the years. I'm not going to sort of lay blame anywhere. Anyway, what we found was that they'd been sending this reminder about sorting this out and paying this fine, and we weren't getting it. It wasn't even getting forwarded to us. But it is quite humiliating when you've got people on your staff next to you and you're being told that Northamptonshire County Council are after you. So anyway, he starts to talk to us, and I'm starting to get really cross because he said it's going to cost you £500 to take the clamp off your car. And I just remember just feeling so cross, so angry, and I was so fed up. And we'd been praying. What's really funny is we'd been praying whilst we got up there, Lord, what are you doing? That was our vision. Our vision was, when we were starting the church, that we needed to pray the Lord's Prayer, that we weren't going up there to start something and invite God into it, but we were going up to join God in what he was already doing in that place and partner with him. And so that meant we had to ask him what he was doing. So I remember feeling so cross and angry, and I, under my breath, went, good Lord, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden, I muttered that. And what I'm trying to say to you is, it doesn't matter sometimes what state of mind you're in, where you're at, or whatever. If you ask God what he's doing, he's going to show you. You don't need to fast for a month. You don't need to have all these sort of righteous rules. Once I've done all of that, God's going to show me what he's doing. Sometimes God just shows up. And this guy, he's telling us about this stuff, and then all of a sudden, something shifts in the atmosphere, and he says to me, are you a vicar? It's getting even worse now, isn't it? And I'm like, well, it's sort of like a part-time vicar, yeah, whatever a part-time vicar is. And he starts to tell me about his sister who died 3 weeks before. And then he starts to sob. Now, we're in the high street. We're in a main area. And he starts to sob. And when I say sob, I'm not saying, oh, could you pass me a tissue, please? He is sobbing. It's like, ah! And he's 6'8", so it's loud, all right? Then he falls on his knees so that he's actually now eye to eye with me. And he is sobbing and groaning and crying and rah, like this. And so I've got my hand on him. People are walking down the other side of the looking over, and I'm like, Lord, please don't ever show me what you're doing again. And, there's this sense in me of like, I need courage to do this. When I asked you to give me courage, I meant in the church, not on the street. Give me courage to do a new life group. And this was like, no, I am at work up this street. You've asked me what I'm doing, even though it was not meant that way. You were just angry, and now I'm showing you what I'm doing. Receive the courage of my spirit. And this guy sobbed, and he sobbed, and it went on. It went on, and it went on. And I was like, Lord, can this stop? And the reason I'm exposing all of this to you is, you don't have to be super spiritual. You don't have to be Mr. and Mrs. Holier than thou for God to use you. Sometimes God meets you in your mess and in your attitude, and he uses something. He taught me a massive lesson at exactly the same time about courage. Now, when all that finished, he said to me, what was that? He looked at me and he went, what was that? I said, that was the Holy Spirit. I said, that was God. I'm introducing you to him. I didn't want to, because you're charging me 500 £500 to get there. I'll be honest with you, like, you weren't in the Lamb's Book of Life 20 minutes ago in my eyes, okay, pal? You know, you're in the lamb stew, more likely. And it was just incredible because he gave his life to Jesus. And he turned around to me and he went, right, Mr. Langford, I can get rid of this £500. Okay? And I'm sitting there. Now, transparency is good for some, isn't it? I remember my first reaction was, glory to God. Oh, God, you are a God of justice. And I'm just dancing. And inside of me, I'm breakdancing, And I'm like, yeah, this is really good. And then I heard the voice of the Lord say to me, don't talk about me and then misrepresent me. Pay the fine. And I was like, in East End language, are you having a giraffe, Lord? Which means a laugh, okay? Are you serious? He said, yeah. Because as we're going to see with Ruth now, what's linked with courage is character and loyalty and kindness. And we can't pray in for courage and then totally disrespect that source that's given us courage for that moment when something of an opportunity comes for it all to get sorted out. Now, this was mind-blowing. I then turned around to him and said, no, it's okay, I'll pay the fine. And he literally said, are you crazy? I can get rid of this for you. And I tell you what, even more than the encounter with the Spirit, he left that conversation completely dumbfounded. And I said to him, I can't introduce you to somebody I follow and then totally misrepresent them. So we paid the fine and we gulped really hard. And we had beans on toast for 2 months. A couple of months later, I'm in a church, because I get to do this a lot. I get to sort of stun people with stories, most weeks. And I was telling them the story. I didn't say anything about the money. I just told them the story about courage. And I said, we just moved as well. And when you move from Chelmsford to London, you're moving in the wrong direction because all the prices are going up and everybody's going that way and you're going that way, right? And so we were like moving into a house going, how are we going to pay the rent? This is crazy. We've left this big church, resource church with the pension and, everything else that comes with it that you get. All the security, all our family think we're stark raving bonkers. Most of my friends in ministry thought I'd completely lost the plot. I was only late 30s. They went, it's normally 50 you have a midlife crisis. Nigel, what are you doing? And we were in this moment, and I'm telling this story. And I kid you not, in the week, I get an email from that church saying, we heard your story, or somebody heard your story. They were so stirred by your story, they want to give you 500 quid. Does that make any sense? I'm like, yeah. Who are they? Put them on the phone. And I was blown away. You see, we weren't making a profit on the deal, right? God gives you what you need. And I just found myself understanding that if I'm going to pray for courage, and I'm put in positions sometimes where I'm going to feel really challenged, if I'm true to what God is asking me to do, He is no man's debtor. And we were just completely blown away by that particular situation. And we see this courage with Ruth. It's like she's not paying 500 quid. She's given her whole life up. She's in this moment. We don't even know yet. She's the Moabite, right? She was with other gods. That's we don't even know where she was at. She has confessed that she wants to be with Naomi and her God will be her God, etc., and all the rest of it. But we start to see Ruth coming alive. I don't know if this phrase, you're on mute, drives you insane. It's something it's over COVID. I remember thinking, if I ever hear anybody say again, you're on mute, you're on mute. And I believe at this point of the story, God is slowly starting to unmute Ruth. Where others sought to shut her up and to marginalize her, she's now being made central in the story. And if you notice in the text, she's no longer called Ruth the Moabite. She's called Ruth. Something significant is happening. So Boaz also starts to speak in the most unlikely fashion. He pictures Ruth in chapter 2, verse 11. He compares Ruth to Israel's patriarchal ancestors. He talks about her faithfulness in coming. Abraham and Jacob. And he's invoking this sense of a matriarch. It's interesting, isn't it, over the years, how we've typexed women often out of the scripture and made them lesser in the story. God is not doing that here. He's actually starting to increase this understanding. Now, considering she is a Moabite, for Boaz to say something like this is completely revolutionary. And she starts to experience the most incredible favor. She starts to see something happening before her eyes. People are looking out for her. She's being given food. She's being allotted a place to work. Something incremental is changing in this story. It doesn't answer any questions of the pain that we were talking about earlier in the day. But is God doing something? You know, sometimes I think we overlook what God is doing in our lives because we expect him to come in the thunder and the lightning. But how many times are we told in the Bible that it's through the still, small voice? We often miss God speaking to us because we look at the thing in which he is speaking to us through. We think that's too small. That's too unlikely. That's insignificant. Let me encourage you that in those moments, it could well be God working behind the scenes in your life in ways that you could not imagine. In chapter 2, verse 6, the worker who calls her Ruth and then it drops the Moabite, the term used there in ancient Hebrew is hasaba. She has come home. She's never been to Bethlehem before. She has come home. I think that is a huge statement about the gospel. You know, we looked at that ark, didn't we? We looked at the gospel. We looked at the story of the Bible. And we looked at it, and we looked at that redemption moment. And we said, is there anything in this story that starts to show us the bigger story? You know, we don't have to wait for Jesus to come to see God's heart for all nations to come to him, to sit around his table. It's a huge intent. I can't, it's a Saturday night, we're all tired. I can't impress on you enough how that term hasaba is God's voice speaking through someone, saying, the person who has never been here, lived here, is not of this place, has come home. Suddenly, the big story of adoption, I'm writing about this at the moment, the big story of God's adoption is starting. You're seeing hints of it. You're seeing expressions of it. God is interested in who sits around the table, and he gets very annoyed with us when we decide who sits around it and who does not. That's not our job. Our job is to lay a table and to welcome everyone in. And so we see this incredible sense of boldness and integrity in Ruth. Something quite powerful and dramatic. We enter chapter 3, and again, I've just literally raced through chapter 2. But we get into chapter 3, and there's all this favor kicking about, and suddenly there's a momentum. You can start to feel like Naomi's getting into sort of like matriarch of the family mode. I don't know if you've ever, whenever I've sat with my mum and my sister and my grandmother, I always was very terrified when they started to scheme and plan together. You know, I'll never forget, you know, when my grandmother would say, your mother and your sister have been talking to me. I was terrified. I thought, my goodness. And so something's happening here. Naomi's like, okay, like I was bitter and spitting feathers at this point. Now all of a sudden, we're over here, and there's an oh, by the way moment. Ruth's in a field, there's all this favor happening. You know, she should be really in so much danger, she's not going to make it. And then all of a sudden, she's being given food. She's being given incredible favor in the face of this courage. And now this boldness arises, because actually you need boldness to be courageous. But I find this suggestion that she gives in chapter 3, verses 1 to 4, really quite troubling. Now, mother-in-law, suggesting to daughter-in-law something seriously dangerous. Can I tell you what that is? We read it earlier. To go to Boaz, for a foreign woman, let alone a woman, to approach a man of influence and reputation. He even alludes to that, doesn't he? Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone you're on the threshing floor. He says that, like, you know, because the appearance will be awful, right? I'm a man of reputation. And so she is told, go to the threshing floor, place yourself by his foot. That is not a safe suggestion. What if this goes horribly wrong? I don't think sometimes we realize just how dangerous it was to be a woman in that time. If you want a modern day understanding, it might not be this extreme, but it's the nearest I can get. It would be very similar to living under the Taliban. They were religious zealots. And people were frequently put to the sword, especially women. Foreign women, especially so, because of the shame and honor, clean and unclean. And so Ruth got this proposition, and you know, I would have been like, Naomi, sorry, stop chewing the barley wheat. You're going slightly mad. I'm not going to do that. What does she say? All right, I'll do it. And I'm reading this story, and again, it's that Netflix moment again. Sorry to bring Netflix in again. Should we do Amazon Prime just to be equality? So Amazon Prime, you know, you're in that minute, and you're like, oh gosh, please don't do that. Like, things are just turning around now, okay? It's just getting a little bit better. Have you ever heard yourself saying this to anybody else? Don't do anything stupid. Does that sound familiar, parents? I can hear my mum and dad laughing back in Wales. Don't do anything stupid. And I'm thinking, Naomi, what are you doing here? I mean, can you call something bold and courageous when it's bonkers? Because, you know, when you know, I often say this to people, when God called us to the altar, right? When God calls us to him, he didn't ask us to leave our brains there. He didn't ask us to leave our common sense there, right? So I'm not encouraging the only way you're going to hear God is if it's bonkers. If you've heard that, I need to like do some serious recommunication. I'm not saying that. But in this particular story, it's a very drastic story, and there are some very drastic suggestions being made. I'll never forget when we were a couple of years into planting the church, and the thing that I mentioned was in the very early days. And literally, God grew what was happening, because then all the people who we were hanging out with started to say, what are you doing, God? What are you up to? It was a very theological prayer. What are you up to? It's the Lord's Prayer, isn't it? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth. What are you doing? Not what am I doing and come and bless me. What are you doing? And I'll be a part of what you're doing. And so we had these moments, and I found myself in that place of danger time and time again, feeling slightly out of it. And I remember getting on an EasyJet flight to Glasgow. And I made this crazy prayer of like, Lord, what are you doing today? Show me. And what I meant was, when I'm on the plane and I'm up in the air, just show me the splendor on the ground, Lord. That's what I was really thinking. Anyway, I'm sitting on the plane. This couple come and sit next to me. We take off. This lady's terrified of flying, so she's shaking in her boots. And I said, oh, are you all right? And she went, no. She said, this is going to be a really long hour up to Glasgow. I really don't like flying. So we got chatting. And then she said to me, what are you doing? And I was going up to speak at a conference. I said, oh, I'm going somewhere to talk to people about the Bible. And she went, are you a vicar? And I said, well, apparently. She went, oh, you look too young to be a vicar. I went, I like you. Let's keep talking. You're the kind of people I like to do business with. Anyway, the Lord whispered in my ear and said, you know, I asked you what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. I was like, no, not in aisle 8 on EasyJet. No way. I haven't got the courage today, Lord. I mean, I've got a big conference. No. Anyway, she looks at me then with fire in her eyes and said, my daughter's getting baptized next week in a church. What's all that about? You know, I told you what I'm doing. You know, you hear that little voice again. I told you what I'm... Yes, okay, Lord. He's laughing. You know, sometimes you just think, and he's just giggling away at like, you know. And I just said, and I gave her a very, really rubbishy explanation, because I tried to keep it quiet because the whole cabin could hear the conversation. And you can see, you know, the air stewards are walking up and going. You know, anyway, we're having this really bizarre conversation. And then she said to me, I'm really intrigued. And at that moment, she looked at me and I said, would you like me to pray for you? And the words came out of my mouth. You know, it's that meatloaf moment. You took the words right out of my mouth. Can I get them back, please? And I prayed for her, and the same kind of thing happened again, where she just started to sob. Now, her husband's really big, and he's sitting next to her, and he looks round at me as if to say, what have you done to my wife? And I said, it's not me, blame God. It's really good evangelism strategy, by the way. And it was this really powerful moment. And then he leant over to me, and he said, I want some of that. Can you pray for me? And I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on? All I did was ask the Lord, what are you doing? And asked him for courage to help me follow through, because I would rather sip an orange juice and be really quiet. I am not a mad raven evangelist. People who hear me speak think I'm a mad raven. No, I'm not. I like to release the evangelists. I'm being really honest with you. It scares the living daylight. I see real gifted evangelists go for it, and I'm like, wow. Right? I am a part-time evangelist. I'm more sort of like prophetic teacher trapped in an evangelist body. You know, it's like, you know, you feel that jarring. But there's that sense of like, and then the Spirit of God came on this guy. No. Who's to say that God won't move on EasyJet? Maybe Ryanair could be a problem, but EasyJet, definitely, right? So I'm praying. And then it all finishes, and then we talk, and we come into land, and she said that was the best flight I've ever had. I was totally at peace. Well, anyway, I walk off thinking, brilliant, I got a brilliant story for my conference. I'm a storyteller, you know, that's what I am mainly. So anyway, I go off, and I'm speaking at this conference, like, you won't believe what happened. And they'll be like, no, you're exaggerating. I went, no, seriously, it did happen. Anyway, I get back on the plane to fly back on the Sunday, and I walk down to my aisle, and guess who's sitting in the same row? Yes, it is Mr. and Mrs. And they look up at me and they go, no way, you know. And then I started doing like, you know, the X-Files music, and it was a very spiritual moment. And we sat and we talked. Now, I'm saying all of this to try and make this kind of thing accessible to you. Because Ruth is called to be courageous in a field where it's super dangerous. I've been called to be courageous, just to ask God what he's doing and then to give it a go. Like, none of the stuff I've mentioned has happened because I was really clever or because I was really gifted or really anointed. I just asked. I can guarantee you, if you walk into Costa on Monday and ask the Lord what he's doing, he may just show you because he's doing something. He's Jehovah Sneaky. He's at work everywhere. You know, there's people in front of you going, look behind you, he's there. Oh, no, he isn't. Oh, yes, he is. He is at work. He is always working. Even when I don't see him, he's working. Even when I can't feel him, he is working. He never stops. He never stops working. Now, I've got some stories that I can't tell you tonight because I haven't got the time, where I've asked that, and it hasn't always been like that. I'm just sharing fun stories. There's been times I've asked the Lord what he's doing, and I haven't obviously heard quite correctly. Maybe if I talk to you again another time, I'll tell you about a few of them. But the Hebrew word for foot here, go and lay down at his foot, is also an expression that can be used in so many different ways. Actually, the root spelling of the word foot, if you read classical Hebrew, a lot of Hebrew scholars would say it was written deliberately, because what is the time that we're in? The time of the... Right. So in the time of the judges, everybody was doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. Suddenly, we're in a story, it's all going okay, then this woman is going... So you're thinking about the... You're initially thinking, oh no, this woman is going to end really badly for her. No. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hang on a minute. A woman is approaching a man in a dark place, secluded place, and his foot, do you understand the Hebrew people? Have you read the Song of Songs? Yeah. Anyone? Yeah, it's okay. God's all right with it, okay? Some people call it the Snog of Snogs, but we call it the Song of Songs. And the truth of the matter is that the word foot there could also be translated as another part of a man's body. I'm not going to put a diagram up there to explain it to you, okay? You did GCSE, A-level, or whatever it was, biology, okay? And it's deliberately made to be mysterious, because what the writer wants you to think is, what is going to happen next? Are you serious? That's my wife's alarm telling me to wrap up. What is going to happen next? It's the time of the judges. Things are starting to work. Things are moving in the right direction. I cannot believe that we're in this moment where this could all go seriously south. She is going to lay himself by his foot. Oh my goodness, what foot are we talking about? Please, no. It's the time of the judges. We know how this is going to end up, and it's all going to go horribly wrong. And an opportunity is going to be missed. Does the restoration of this nation rest on two people doing the right thing when no one else is looking? Yes. It's a beautiful encounter, because they become countercultural to the time. Boaz honors Ruth. He calls her daughter. And they have this moment of connection. But the truth of the matter is that the integrity... So we were singing about loving kindness tonight, okay? We think about Ruth with the boldness and the courage, but the character... The ha'il, the hesed, which is the loving kindness. That's Hebrew for love. The hesed. But the ha'il, which is the courageous woman of character, is also the theme that comes out. And Boaz, the man of character. They meet in this moment where it all could have gone horribly wrong. Let me say this. Could the changing of an atmosphere in your town rest on something you do when no one else is looking? Yes. Could you change the atmosphere in your work, in your family, because you're doing something when no one else is looking? John Wimber used to say, we live before an audience of one. You see, it's easy to live before an audience of 301, but when no one else is looking, it's much harder. And in this moment, something happens between Ruth and Boaz. And I think sometimes we've lost the story because we jump straight to chapter 4, which I'm going to do tomorrow morning. Oh, sorry, I've run over time. Let me wrap up. But we jump into sort of like, oh, he saved the day. Good old Boaz. But something really powerful happened between two people in that moment that built on the courage and the boldness. It was the integrity and it was the character. And suddenly, an image in this story of salvation and redemption, an image of Christ will emerge tomorrow morning in chapter 4 of redemption in this story that points us to the bigger story. But courageous and faithful living is something that marks out how Ruth works out up until we get to chapter 4. Could we stand and just pray together quickly? Sorry. I mentioned some of the stories tonight because I just felt like God was wanting to challenge you. Now, that's my story. That you can't put that on someone else. But what's your story? So it's not the end, it's just a bend. We've done all of that. We've gnashed teeth and we've wept and we've jumped up and down and turned around and we've gone round a bend and there's a new visa, there's a new horizon. Suddenly we think, oh, something's shifting, something's changing. Okay, now, what am I going to need to head to that new vista? What courage and boldness is God calling me to? Because it could be that I do something when no one else is looking, don't get any plaudits for it at all, but the Holy Spirit meets me in that moment and God can use me to change the fortunes of a place. Because what we'll find tomorrow is that the fortunes of Israel become radically changed as a result. So Lord, I just pray tonight that you would fall on your people, speak to your people. You would encourage them, inspire them, and you would speak to them about what you're calling them out to be. I pray for an increase of courage and boldness. Lord, I pray that you would speak to us in the moments when things are hidden and we are out of the public eye and you are doing something behind the scenes. The unlikely things in the unlikely places with the unlikely people. And that you would use this people to change Tewkesbury and the surrounding areas by your power and your grace, just like you did with Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.